kind of, it's not the real meaning of the word, but it's got a second meaning.
Limelight is so bigger. It's like, it's very difficult to
Then there's one object here in the room which is quite odd to all the other objects, even though the inventory is quite various.
Yeah.
And that's the table.
Yeah.
So why was it important for you to include the table into the show?
Again, it's a kind of linking piece, really. What's interesting to me about the table, and of course the terrible thing about these kind of the good thing about talking is talking and communicating. The bad thing about it is, like, I explain the work to people in the room, and I don't want to do that. But the interesting thing to me about the table is that I think of the table very much as two things. One is a drawing, so I think it has a very drawing-like quality to it. Like, I think of it as something almost a bit dumb, like a child's drawing of a table, you know, so that if a child went to draw what a table is like, they draw something a bit like this, you know. They wouldn't, you know, the legs go down the side, they're not in here like maybe a regular kitchen table might be or something like that. So that's one thing, it's very much a drawing in the space. And the second thing is that I think of this table as being a studio, or a potential studio space. And that by making the studio space, I've also made the artwork. So you make the studio and then you're finished making the piece. They're the two kind of main things that made me put it in the show here. But then I think you also have this, by where it's placed in the room, you've got this relationship to the window, the outside world, the studio here, and this sort of relationship between these two spaces. And I wouldn't over kind of verbalize it more than that, because in a way I think it spoils its relationship to the show if I said more than that. But I think there are other things going on there between it, the show, and the outside space.
Okay, so
should we go downstairs?
Yeah, thank you very much for the information. And the artist is here later on, so you can ask him privately if you have anything else. And then I would suggest we go downstairs to see the exhibition of Jimmy Rugger. And also it appears to have a strong connection to fashion. So is that also a subject that's interesting you?
I think it is, insofar as in fashion is about covering and presenting a certain self, an image. And I think this particular one has, because it's a bust, but at the same time it is still very much referring also to text, and then, you know, how, writing and writing on the body, or the idea of writing on the body. And so it's a collar, but it's also A4 pages one could write possibly on with pins. And, you know, like the pins you use for fashion, but these pins are not for fashion. They're like, you know, architect, or the same pins I've used to present the images. So there is this kind of ambivalent kind of situation here, where it's like there is again something semi-violent that is kind of happening. And so fashion informs some of the work, but insofar as there is a system in fashion, as so much there is a system in photography and representation, and it's about how that system either fails or succeeds. And so, I mean, the interest is has many kind of layers, and that, you know, it would take forever to kind of talk about. But I think again, maybe that comes in the title and what we were talking about in terms of how the title functions. And Elegantly Wasted is as much a way of life as maybe something that could be quite factual. And I quite like this kind of paradox within the two words juxtaposed, you know, the idea of elegance and the idea of waste. But then that is a possible way of life, and that comes also maybe through some lifestyle and the way we hear about fashion and glamour. And but then that's not what is happening here. I think this is also very much about the blank and the nothingness and the kind of emptiness of like the writer's block. But then this time maybe kind of more on this kind of level.
But then if you see it in a fashion kind of way, this like to have a collar like this is a really strong statement to represent to the outside.
Yeah, it's but it would also be terribly old-fashioned in a way, as in like, you know, it's a bit like this Rembrandt kind of colors, and nobody would wear that. I mean, you know, there's something kind of maybe that points at the kind of older times, and something that is has no longer any currency. I mean, maybe like in this image also. But I think there's something quite similar happening between that color and this image in terms of something extending, going beyond like the pleats in the dress are repeated and are extending to like the outside. And I think the idea of like maybe language and communication as much as fashion, which is also about communicating something, are very important, just as much as we said literature was a way, you know, was important and informing the work.